My name is Lyra. For most of my life, that name felt like it belonged to someone else, the dutiful daughter, the reliable sister, the quiet woman who learned early that her own needs were secondary. I'm a nurse, a single mother to a little girl named Nina, whose breath is the rhythm my world moves to. We live in Oak Haven, a small city nestled in the Pacific Northwest, where the air is almost always damp with the scent of pine and the sky is a painter's palette of grays. It's a place that can feel cozy or confining, depending on the day. For a long time, for me, it had been confining. My story, the one that really matters, the one where I started to find myself, began on a Tuesday drenched in rain. My daughter, Nina, had just come home from the emergency room. Her tiny hand was curled around the worn, plush body of Barnaby, her stuffed bunny, and her breathing was still shallow after a severe asthma attack had stolen the air from her lungs. I looked into her tired, trusting eyes and felt that familiar, fierce wave of love and terror that is the core of motherhood. And then my mother, Beatrice, looked me dead in the eyes and her voice, sharp as broken glass, cut through the quiet of our small home. Pay your sister's rent, or get out. When I said no, my voice barely a whisper, my father, Walter, hit me. The blow was so hard I stumbled backward, the sharp corner of the coffee table biting into my hip as I hit the floor. The coppery taste of blood filled my mouth, and through the ringing in my ears, I heard my child scream. Mom! Walter stood over me, his face a mask of cold satisfaction. Maybe now you'll learn to obey, he sneered. That was the moment. The moment the world fractured and came back together in a new, terrifyingly clear shape. In their eyes, I wasn't a daughter who had just spent hours terrified in a hospital. I wasn't a mother trying to soothe her sick child. I was an asset, a tool, a resource that was malfunctioning. They would rather see me bleed on my own floor than lose their control over me. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly comprehend, was that in their attempt to break me, they had just created the one thing they feared most. A daughter who would finally fight back. Before we dive in, tell me, have you ever been pushed so far by the people who were supposed to love you that you reached a point of no return? A point where you realized that walking away wasn't just an option, but a necessity for survival? Let me share what happened next. I drove home with Nina in the back seat, her head resting against the cool glass of the window, her small hand still clutching Barnaby. The hospital bracelet, a stark white band against her pale skin, felt like a brand of my failure. The rain was a light but persistent drizzle, tapping a gentle, hypnotic rhythm on the windshield that was entirely at odds with the storm raging inside me. Her asthma attack had been the worst yet, the frantic rush to the ER, leaving me hollowed out and frayed at the edges. But she was stable. She was breathing. That was the only thought I allowed myself to hold on to. As I turned onto our street in Oak Haven, the familiar sight of Douglas firs dripping onto cracked sidewalks passed in a blur. When I pulled into the small, designated spot for our duplex, I saw their car, an old, beige sedan that seemed to sag under the weight of their expectations. My stomach clenched into a tight, cold knot. It was an old, sharp fear, a reflex I'd had since childhood. I parked and took a deep, shaky breath before turning to Nina, managing a smile that felt like it might crack my face. We're home, sweetie, I said, my voice softer than I felt, as I brushed a stray curl from her damp forehead. She nodded, her big brown eyes shadowed with exhaustion, Barnaby tucked securely under her chin. We stepped inside, the faint, clean smell of damp earth clinging to our coats. Before I could even hang my keys on the hook by the door, Beatrice's voice hit me like a physical blow. About time you got back, she snapped. She stood with her arms crossed, a fortress of disapproval, her heavy floral perfume mingling with the scent of rain. Mom, what are you doing here? I asked, keeping my voice as steady as I could, acutely aware of Nina's small presence beside me, her eyes watching everything. Don't you play dumb with me, Lyra, she hissed, her voice low and venomous. Isadora's rent is due. You know it is. And you're going to pay it. I took a slow breath, turning to help Nina out of her little raincoat. I can't, I said, my back to them. I just paid for Nina's ER visit and the new nebulizer. I don't have Don't you start with your excuses, she cut in, her eyes sharp and dismissive. They flicked toward Nina, who had moved to stand near the couch, clutching Barnaby so tightly her knuckles were white. Your sister is struggling, and you're living here like a queen. A laugh escaped me, bitter and low. Like a queen. I gestured around the small, tidy living room of our two-bedroom duplex. Mom, I am barely making it. Walter stepped out from the hallway then, a silent, hulking presence. His work boots were wet, leaving muddy tracks on the floor I had mopped just that morning before our world had tilted on its axis. His face was calm, too calm, as he glanced from me to Beatrice. Maybe if you learned to show your mother some respect, we wouldn't have to have these conversations. I could feel Nina's gaze on me, wide and uncertain. She was waiting for me to fix it, to smooth it over, to become the placating daughter I had always been. But something was different this time. The terror of the past few hours had stripped away my usual defenses, leaving my nerves raw and exposed. I have done enough, I said, my voice firmer now, my heart beginning to pound a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I can't keep paying for Isadora's choices. You selfish girl, Beatrice spat, stepping closer until her sharp, painted fingernail was pointing just inches from my face. You think you're better than us? Because you have your little nursing job and your child? You owe this family. You owe us. I instinctively stepped back, raising my hands in a gesture of peace. Don't do this here. Not in front of her. Oh, now you care what happens in front of her, Beatrice shot back, her lips curling into a sneer. That was when Walter moved. It was a blur of motion, so fast I didn't have time to process it, let alone react. His open palm cracked across my face, the force of it sending me stumbling sideways. I lost my balance and hit the floor hard. The sharp corner of the wooden coffee table dug viciously into my hip, and the world tilted, a dizzying kaleidoscope of pain and shock. I tasted blood, metallic and warm, filling my mouth. The sound that followed was worse than the slap, worse than the impact. It was the soft thud of Barnaby hitting the floor, followed by a high, terrified scream. Mom! Nina's voice, broken and shrill, sliced through the ringing in my head. I pushed myself up on my elbows, my vision swimming. I looked up and saw Walter's face twisted in a sneer of disgust and satisfaction. Maybe now you'll understand how this works, he said, wiping his hand on his jeans as if he'd touched something unclean. Nina was crying, her small hands shaking as she reached for me, but she stopped, her terrified gaze locked on Beatrice, who just stood there, arms still crossed, watching me with cold indifference, as if I were the problem that needed solving. I could taste the copper on my tongue, mixing with the salty tears I refused to let fall. I pushed myself up, my hip screaming in protest. Nina's wide, wet eyes met mine, her beloved Barnaby forgotten on the floor beside her. My heart clenched with a pain far deeper than the physical blow. Anger, hot and unfamiliar, mixed with the bone-deep humiliation. A new fear bloomed. What if a neighbor heard her scream? What if someone called Child Protective Services? They would use it against me, paint me as unstable, and take her from me. It was their ultimate weapon. The rain outside kept tapping, soft and steady, a gentle rhythm that mocked the violent chaos inside our home. Beatrice's voice, devoid of all warmth, sliced through the quiet. Now get up and do the right thing for your family. I looked at Nina, at her eyes begging me to make it stop. My hands were shaking as I wiped the blood from my lip with the back of my hand. I pushed myself to my feet, ignoring the throbbing pain in my hip. Something inside me, something I had kept locked away for years, finally cracked open. And in that moment, a cold, hard resolve settled deep in my bones, like a seed I didn't know I had planted, finally taking root. I was not going to let them do this to me, to her, ever again. I swallowed, tasting blood and salt, feeling the bruise already beginning to bloom on my cheek. I looked at them, my parents, and my voice was unnervingly calm, even as my heart thundered in my chest. They had no idea what I was about to do. That thought followed me like a shadow as I rinsed the blood from my split lip in the bathroom sink later that night. The water ran pink for a moment, then clear. I tucked Nina into bed, her small body rigid, Barnaby wrapped tight in her arms. She had turned her face to the wall, as if she couldn't bear to look at me, at the mother who hadn't protected her. I stood in her doorway for a long time, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest. Each breath was a precious gift, a reminder that she was here, that she was alive, and that I would not, let this ever happen again. Sleep didn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Walter's hand swinging toward me. I felt the sting on my skin, heard the sharp crack that echoed not just in the room, but in a place deep inside me that had already been fractured too many times to count. By the time the pale, watery light of dawn pushed through the blinds, I was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee I didn't remember making. Nina was up too, sitting on the couch with the TV on low. The cartoon colors flickered across her face, but her expression was blank. She was clutching Barnaby so tightly the seams looked ready to burst. I watched her from the kitchen, my sunglasses on, even though the sky outside was a dull, bruised purple, to hide the swelling that had bloomed overnight, a dark shadow swallowing the corner of my eye. My phone buzzed on the table, a jarring sound in the heavy quiet that had filled our home. One message, then another, a relentless cascade of words I didn't want to see. Stop being so dramatic. You owe your family more respect. Pay Isadora's rent or we'll be back. Beatrice's words burned on the screen. For a fleeting moment, I imagined smashing the phone against the wall, but I didn't. I couldn't afford a new one. I opened my banking app, my thumb trembling as I watched the numbers load with agonizing slowness. The balance sat there, a stark reminder that most of my savings were gone, drained by the hospital copay, the new medication, groceries, and gas, leaving me with barely enough for our own rent. I closed my eyes, and a flood of memories washed over me. Beatrice's voice, telling me how Isadora was the sensitive one, how I, the strong one, should help her because family takes care of family. Even as I was the one paying for Isadora's coding bootcamp tuition, her car repairs, the groceries she never thanked me for. I was the ATM daughter. The reliable one. The one they called when they needed something, but never the one they called just to see if I was okay. A new notification dinged, pulling me back to the present. It wasn't from my mother. It was from Chloe, the young woman who lived in the duplex across from ours, the one with the friendly golden retriever that barked at squirrels. The message was short. Are you okay? I heard shouting. Do you need help? Attached was a video file. My hand hovered over it, a wave of nausea rising in my throat. I was afraid to press play, but I did. Beatrice's voice, sharp and angry, filled the small kitchen even on low volume. I saw Walter's hand swing, saw myself hit the ground, heard Nina's scream, high and broken, a sound that cut deeper than the slap ever could. The video shook slightly. Chloe must have been filming through her blinds, trying to stay hidden. It didn't matter. The moment was agonizingly clear. Humiliation rose in my throat, hot and choking, as I watched myself lying there. The camera caught the exact moment I looked up at Nina, trying to form a reassuring smile through the blood and fear, trying to protect her when I couldn't even protect myself. I paused the video on Nina's face, her eyes wide with a terror no child should ever know, tears streaking down her cheeks, Barnaby clutched to her chest like a shield. My first instinct was to delete it, to erase the evidence of my own weakness, to bury it like I had buried every other time Beatrice and Walter had made me feel small and worthless. But I didn't. I replayed it. And again. Each time, I forced myself to see the fear in Nina's eyes, the confusion, the hurt. The question she didn't have the words to ask shimmered in her gaze. Why, Mommy? Why did you let them do that? The coffee had gone cold in my hands. I set the cup down, pressing my fingers to my throbbing temple, breathing in the quiet that was starting to feel like a suffocating lie. The fear of CPS taking Nina if a neighbor reported the incident was a real and terrifying threat, a fear Beatrice had expertly wielded for years to keep me in line. Don't let people see our business, Lyra, she'd always say. They'll take your kid and leave you with nothing. And I had believed her. I had let that fear chain me to them while they took and took, while they chipped away at my spirit, reminding me that I was nothing more than the daughter they could drain whenever they pleased. But that fear had already cost me too much. It had cost me pieces of myself, and now it was costing Nina the safe, stable childhood she deserved. I looked back at the paused video, at Nina's eyes, at Barnaby's floppy ear peeking over her small arms. I thought about all the nights I'd spent staring at the ceiling, worrying about bills. All the mornings I'd dragged myself out of bed to take an extra shift at the hospital. All the times I had given them money I didn't have, clinging to the pathetic hope that one day, they would finally see me, appreciate me, love me. They never did. They never would. I pressed play one last time, letting Nina's scream fill the silent kitchen, letting it shatter the illusion of peace I had let them build around me for far too long. I watched until the screen went dark. Then I set the phone down on the table, my hands perfectly steady, my heart pounding with a rhythm I finally understood. I stood there in the kitchen, the phone still in my hand, the words never again echoing in my mind as if they had been waiting years to be spoken aloud. The rain had started again, a steady, soft tapping against the window that mirrored the quiet resolve hardening in my chest. The night had crawled by, each creak of the old duplex making me stiffen, my body braced for their return. They didn't come back, but their presence, their angry words, clung to the air like a damp, musty smell that wouldn't leave. It was Sunday now, the persistent gray sky making the small kitchen feel even smaller. I moved with a forced quiet, pulling ingredients from the pantry, whisking eggs and milk together to make pancakes for Nina. The gentle sizzle of the batter hitting the hot pan and the sweet smell of vanilla were a fragile shield against the ugliness of the day before. I glanced over at her. She sat at the small kitchen table, her little hands wrapped around Barnaby, crayons scattered beside her. Colors had rolled off the table and onto the floor, but she didn't seem to notice. There was no humming, no singing along to cartoon theme songs, no restless tapping of her feet. Just a heavy silence, her head bent low, her soft brown hair falling around her face as she colored. I set a plate of pancakes in front of her, sliding a small bottle of maple syrup beside it, forcing a smile. "Pancakes, sweetie," I said, my voice gentle. She didn't look up. She just pressed a dark crayon harder onto the paper, the wax groaning under the pressure. I sat across from her, resting my elbows on the table, pretending to sip my coffee, which had already gone cold. When she finished, she pushed the paper across the table toward me without a word. My fingers hesitated before I picked it up. As I brought it closer, my breath caught in my throat. It was a drawing of me, a stick figure lying on the floor, a messy red smear of crayon near my head. Barnaby was on the floor a few inches away. In the corner of the drawing was Nina, tiny and alone, with big, dark eyes and blue crayon tears falling down her cheeks. The room in her drawing was unmistakably ours, the window with the rain streaking down, the brown couch, even the small woven rug that had bunched up under my feet when I fell. The world tilted again. The crayon lines weren't just colors on paper, they were a mirror, reflecting everything I had tried to shield her from, everything I had tried to pretend wasn't real. It was all there, rendered with the brutal, heartbreaking honesty only a child possesses. Nina's small voice broke the silence, so soft I almost missed it. "Will they hurt you again, Mom?" I swallowed hard against the lump in my throat, pressing the drawing to my chest for a moment before setting it carefully on the table. I reached across, covering her tiny hand with mine, but she still wouldn't look at me. She just kept her eyes on Barnaby, rubbing its worn ear between her thumb and forefinger. Shame and anger twisted together inside me, a volatile storm I couldn't push away. The shame was a physical weight, making my shoulders slump as I faced the truth. My daughter saw me as someone who could be hurt, who couldn't stop it, who couldn't protect her. And then a white-hot anger burned through the shame, a rising heat that made my jaw tighten, my teeth clench. I had let this happen. I had let it happen over and over, telling myself it was to keep the peace, to preserve the family, to keep her safe. What a lie that was. My phone buzzed on the counter, jerking me from my thoughts. The screen lit up with another barrage of messages from Beatrice. "You're being so dramatic. Family means sacrifice. Isadora needs you." Then another, from Walter. "Simple and cold. Family means you obey." I gripped the phone, the plastic case groaning under the pressure of my hand. I wanted to hurl it against the wall, to watch it shatter into 1,000 pieces. But I didn't. I turned the screen off and set it back on the table, breathing in, trying to steady the violent shaking in my hands. Nina looked up at me then, her eyes too old for her 6 years, filled with questions she didn't know how to ask and a fear she didn't deserve to carry. She clutched Barnaby tighter, pressing its soft, worn body to her cheek, and I knew. I knew with every fiber of my being that I couldn't let this continue. Not for her. And not for me. I picked up the phone again, my thumb hovering over the screen as I unlocked it. My reflection stared back at me in the dark glass, a faint outline of the bruise under my eye, still visible beneath the makeup if I looked hard enough. I didn't flinch this time. My fingers moved with a new, decisive speed, typing out 2 words I had never allowed myself to say before. 2 words that felt like a key turning in a lock I hadn't known I was trapped behind. Don't come back. I pressed send. It was quiet for a moment after that. The phone screen went dark. Nina's drawing sat on the table between us, a stark testament to the life we were living. Her crayon version of me, broken on the floor. Barnaby watching. Nina watching. I reached over and pulled her into my lap, holding her close, pressing my lips to the top of her head. I breathed in the familiar scent of her shampoo and the simple, innocent warmth of her small body, and it was all the reason I needed. She looked up, her eyes searching mine. I brushed her hair back gently. "No more, baby," I whispered, my voice thick with unshed tears. I picked up her drawing, smoothing out the wrinkles with my palm. I walked to the refrigerator and put it up with a magnet, right in the center, where we would see it every day. I was done hiding. I was done pretending. It would stay there, a promise to her. A promise to myself. I looked back at her, meeting her clear, steady gaze, and whispered, "It ends now." That was what I told myself, whispering it into the quiet of the living room, my breath fogging the window as I stared out at the wet street. Dawn was breaking, cold and clear after a night of steady rain. I pulled on my scrubs, the same pair I'd worn too many shifts in a row, and brushed a strand of hair behind my ear, careful not to touch the fading, yellowish bruise I'd meticulously hidden under layers of concealer. Nina was still asleep, Barnaby tucked under her chin, her breathing finally even and deep. I let her be, closing her bedroom door softly behind me as I stepped out into the chilly morning. The hospital smelled of its usual trinity: bleach, antiseptic, and burnt coffee. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered with a weary buzz as I made my way to the break room, the rubber soles of my shoes squeaking on the linoleum. I caught a glimpse of myself in the small mirror above the sink as I filled a paper cup with the stale, dark brew. The reflection that stared back looked like a stranger, a woman with haunted eyes, dark circles that makeup couldn't hide, and a mouth set in a line too tight to be called calm. I ran a hand across my face, pressing my fingers to the spot where Walter's hand had landed, a physical reminder that I was still here, still standing. My phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me out of my trance. I glanced down and saw a series of notifications from my bank, each one a tiny, painful jab. Payment processed. Account balance low. Overdraft protection activated. I closed my eyes, a montage of expenses flashing behind my lids. The ER copay, Nina's new medication, the rent I'd scraped together so she could have a stable home, so she could sleep without worry. How many times had I covered bills for Beatrice and Walter? For Isadora? I'd always told myself it was temporary, that it was what family did. My phone rang as I was about to start my rounds. I answered it out of habit, tucking it between my shoulder and ear while I pulled on a fresh pair of sterile gloves. The voice on the other end was polite, almost apologetic, but the words she spoke made my stomach plummet to the floor. It was the credit union. They were calling to confirm the recent, and rather large, use of my home equity line of credit. "The what?" I asked, my voice hollow. "The home equity line on your property, ma'am," the woman said patiently. "It appears your parents, Beatrice and Walter, who are listed as authorized users, drew the remaining balance to help your sister, Ms. Isadora, with a new business venture. The emergency fund. The money I had painstakingly put aside, the safety net I thought was there for a true catastrophe, for me and Nina, was gone. I managed to thank her before hanging up, my hands trembling so violently I had to place the phone down on the counter. On the drive home hours later, the world outside the car seemed muted and distant. I kept the windows cracked, letting the cold Oakhaven air bite at my face, hoping the sting would keep me from screaming, from pulling over, and just letting the grief and rage consume me. I parked, walked up the 3 concrete steps to our small duplex, and leaned against the door for a long moment, gathering myself before going inside. Nina was at the table coloring, the familiar smell of peanut butter in the air. Her hair was sticking up in a cute tuft at the back of her head from her nap. She looked up when I came in, her eyes bright, and gave me a small smile. I forced one back, a painful stretching of muscles, hiding the hurricane that was tearing through me. Later, I ran out to grab a few groceries, needing milk and bread, the essentials that always seemed to run out faster than I could buy them. The store was busy, a cacophony of rattling carts and droning checkout beepers that made it hard to think. That's when I saw her. Isadora. She was in the cosmetics aisle, laughing into her phone, tossing a bottle of expensive-looking serum into her cart without even glancing at the price. She was wearing a new, stylish trench coat, her nails were perfectly manicured, and her hair was styled in the kind of effortless, glossy curls that cost a fortune at a salon. I stood there for a moment, frozen, watching her giggle as she flipped her hair. "Yeah, the spa day was amazing," she was saying. "Totally worth it. I might go back next week." She didn't see me at first, but when she turned, her eyes met mine. They slid over me, from my worn scrubs to my scuffed sneakers, with a look of faint disgust, as if I were something unpleasant she'd rather not deal with. "How can you afford all this?" I heard myself say, my voice a low, trembling thing. "Isadora, do you have any idea what's happening? To me? To Nina?" She rolled her eyes, a gesture of pure, unadulterated dismissal, and pulled her cart back slightly. "God, Lyra, you're always so dramatic. Maybe if you weren't so bitter all the time, they'd love you, too," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. She turned her back on me as if I were nothing, her phone already back to her ear, laughing again as she walked away. I stood there for a long moment, my hands gripping the handle of my empty shopping basket so hard my knuckles turned white. Her words sank into me like shards of ice. The family martyr. That's what she'd called me once, a joke she'd made to Beatrice when she thought I was out of earshot. They had laughed about how I always paid, how I always showed up, how I was the one they could drain dry because I was too soft, too desperate for their approval to ever say no. Back at home, I sat on the couch, the groceries still in their bags on the floor. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. Nina was coloring again, her head bent in concentration, but she kept glancing up at me, her brow furrowed. She could feel the tension radiating off me, a heavy, toxic cloud I couldn't hide anymore. She clutched Barnaby closer, the way she did when she was scared, and I forced myself to breathe, to keep the hot tears from coming. I replayed Isadora's words in my head, the smirk on her face, the casual cruelty. I thought about the equity, about the money I thought was there to protect Nina, and how it was gone, spent on spa treatments and shopping trips, on a business venture Isadora would likely abandon the moment it became difficult. They don't love me. They love what I do for them. The thought was a clean, sharp blade, cutting through the fog of hurt and shame that had clouded my judgment for years. I looked at Nina, at the way she was trying so hard to be small and quiet, trying to be brave, because she thought that's what I needed from her. She deserved better than a mother who was a doormat. I deserved better than to be one. I stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the street. The cold light of the late afternoon stretched across the pavement, glinting off the puddles left by the morning rain. I pressed my hand to the cool glass, feeling the chill seep into my skin, grounding me. "They're about to see who I really am," I whispered. The words were steady, not a promise, but a statement of fact. I kept telling myself that as I rinsed out Nina's lunchbox in the sink, the water running warm over my hands, steam curling up into the cold air of the kitchen. It was Wednesday, the kind of bleak, gray afternoon that made you want to crawl under a pile of blankets and forget the world existed. But there was no forgetting. Not anymore. The clock on the wall ticked past 3 p.m. as I folded the last of Nina's laundry, placing her small t-shirts in neat stacks, her favorite socks with the pink stripes on top. The school bus would be dropping her off any minute. I stood by the front window, watching the street. The bare branches of the maple trees swayed in a restless breeze, and the sky was heavy and bruised, pregnant with the promise of more rain. Nina stepped off the bus, her unicorn backpack looking too big for her small shoulders. Barnaby was tucked under one arm, and her eyes scanned the street until they found me in the window. She walked quickly, almost running. I opened the door before she could knock, pulling her into my arms as she stepped over the threshold. "Mom," she whispered into my coat, her voice tight. "Are they coming back?" I knelt down, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead, forcing myself to meet her worried eyes. "No one is coming in here unless I say so," I said, my voice firm and reassuring. "You're safe here, honey." She nodded, but she held on to Barnaby like it was a life raft, her fingers gripping the worn, plush fabric, her eyes darting around the living room as if expecting shadows to leap out from the corners. I made her a snack of peanut butter on crackers, and we sat together at the table, the television on low in the background playing a cartoon she didn't really watch. She picked at the crackers, her silence heavier than any words she could have spoken. Around 5, I realized we were out of milk and a few other things for dinner. I didn't want to leave her alone, but the grocery store was only a 5-minute drive away. She promised to stay inside, to keep the door locked, to have the phone right beside her. I kissed her forehead before I left, my steps quick as I crossed the small parking lot to my car. The store was crowded, the usual after-work rush. People moved slowly in the aisles, carts squeaking, the low hum of conversation filling the air. I grabbed what we needed, my mind on a loop of everything I had to do, checked out quickly, and hurried back. The plastic grocery bags rustled against my legs as I climbed the 3 concrete steps to our front door. The door was ajar. For a heart-stopping moment, I froze, the bags slipping slightly in my grip, my heart slamming against my ribs like a trapped bird. I pushed the door open with my foot, my voice tight as I called out Nina. I heard her before I saw her, a small, muffled cry from behind the couch. I dropped the bags on the floor, my eyes adjusting to the dim light of the living room. Beatrice was standing by the bookshelf, my small jewelry box open, her hands rifling through its contents. Walter was near the hallway, blocking the path to the bedrooms, his arms crossed, a smirk playing on his lips. "We're just taking what's ours, since you refused to help," Beatrice said without looking at me, dropping one of my grandmother's bracelets into her oversized purse. "Mom, please," I said, my voice low and shaking with a fury I could barely contain. "Put that down. You can't just come in here." She finally glanced up, her eyes cold and hard. "Don't you take that tone with me. We gave you everything, and you can't even find it in your heart to help your own sister." I took a step forward, but Walter shifted, blocking my path, his shoulders broad, his eyes daring me to try and get past him. "You need to leave," I said, my voice louder this time. "Now." Suddenly, Beatrice gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Her body sagged dramatically as she leaned against the counter for support. "You're killing me, Lyra," she moaned, her voice breaking into a theatrical sob. The stress, my heart. I froze. For a split second, instinct took over. The nurse in me, the daughter in me, stepped toward her, my hand reaching out. But then I caught it, the way her eyes flickered open for a fraction of a second, checking to see if I was buying it, if her performance was working. I pulled my hand back, letting it drop to my side. My jaw tightened. Outside, I saw movement. Neighbors. Their faces were pressed against their windows, a few stepping onto their porches, whispering, pointing. Beatrice's wail grew louder as she saw them too. She slid to the floor, clutching her chest. Walter's voice boomed through the open door. "She's abusing her own sick mother. Look what she's doing to her." I felt the heat rise in my face, a wave of sharp, potent humiliation slicing through me as I understood their play. I saw how it must look from the outside, the hysterical, weeping mother on the floor, the stoic, angry daughter standing over her. A man yelling about abuse while the neighborhood shook their heads, their faces a mixture of pity and judgment. Behind me, I heard Nina's cry, high and terrified. "Stop it." She stood there, her small body trembling, Barnaby clutched to her chest, tears streaming down her pale cheeks. I turned to her, reaching out, but she flinched back from me. And in that moment, something inside me broke for the final time. This wasn't about me anymore. It was about her. It was about the world she would grow up in, the lessons she would learn about love and safety if I let this continue. The flashing lights of an ambulance painted the walls in strobing reds and blues. When the paramedics tried to check Beatrice's vitals, her sobs miraculously turned into protests. She pushed them away, insisting she was fine, glaring at me as if I were the source of all her pain. Walter gave me a look that promised retribution, one that said, "This isn't over." He helped Beatrice up, her sobs quieting to sniffles as she clung to him, casting one last, hateful look over her shoulder as they left. When the front door finally closed and the sirens faded into the distance, I stood in the middle of the room, the spilled groceries still on the floor. Nina's quiet sobs were the only sound in the suffocating silence. I walked over to her, knelt down, and pulled her into my arms. "I'm so sorry, baby," I whispered into her hair, my own tears finally slipping free, hot and silent. "I'm so sorry you had to see that." She didn't answer. She just held on to me, her small body shaking as I rocked her gently. I looked up, the room blurry through my tears, seeing the mess they had left behind, the open drawers, the scattered jewelry, the palpable feeling of violation that hung heavy in the air. "They've crossed the line," I whispered, my voice steady now, a promise more than a statement. I kept hearing those words in my head as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling while dawn slowly peeled away the darkness. Nina was curled beside me, her small hand gripping my arm even in sleep, Barnaby pressed against her chest like a silent, plush guard. Her breath was steady, but every so often she would whimper, a small, wounded sound that made my heart crack open all over again. I had spent too many nights like this, paralyzed by fear, telling myself I was keeping the peace. But peace built on a foundation of fear isn't peace at all. It's a leash, and they had held it tight around my neck for my entire life. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Nina, and padded into the kitchen. The linoleum was cold under my bare feet, the air sharp in my lungs. I wrapped a sweater around my shoulders, poured myself a cup of coffee, and sat down at the table with my laptop. My hands trembled slightly, but I forced them to steady. This time, I wouldn't let fear shake me. I opened the messages from Beatrice, the ones that said, "Pay up or we'll be back." The ones that called me selfish and heartless. The ones that made me question my own worth as a daughter. I took a screenshot of every single one. Then I opened the video file from my neighbor, Chloe. The video where Walter's hand cracked across my face. Where Nina's screams split the air. I downloaded it, saving it to a new, secure folder on my cloud drive. I opened my phone's camera roll, scrolling back through years of photos. I found the ones I had taken quietly, shamefully, over the years. The faint, finger-shaped bruises on my upper arm from where Walter had grabbed me too hard. A photo of a split lip from when Beatrice, in a fit of rage, had thrown a book that slipped. I had never planned to keep them, but some deep, wounded part of me had whispered, "Save it. Just in case." Now I knew why. I turned on my phone's voice recorder, my voice steady and calm, and recounted the events of the break-in, how they had walked into my home uninvited, how they had tried to steal my things, how Beatrice had faked a medical emergency to manipulate me and the watching neighbors. I labeled every file meticulously, uploading everything to a folder I named Nina's Safety. I repeated the name in my head like a mantra. This wasn't about revenge. This was about protection. By the time the sun had fully risen, painting the Oakhaven sky in a cold, pale blue, I was ready. I made breakfast for Nina, pancakes with a small swirl of chocolate chips, a simple treat that could usually make her smile, even on hard days. She ate quietly, her small legs swinging under the table, glancing up at me with those wide eyes that held too much knowledge for a child her age. "Mom," she asked softly, "are we safe now?" I knelt in front of her chair, brushing her hair back from her face, looking directly into her eyes. "We will be, baby," I said, the words a solemn vow. "I promise." Later that morning, I dropped Nina off at school, kissing her forehead as she clung to me for a moment longer than usual. She looked back at me as she walked through the doors, her backpack bouncing with each step, Barnaby's ear sticking out of the side zipper. I didn't go to the hospital. I drove straight to the county records office, a formidable brick building downtown. The air was crisp, biting at my cheeks as I walked inside, a slim folder tucked under my arm. The determination in my chest felt heavier and more solid than any fear I had ever carried. Inside, a polite clerk tapped at her keyboard as I requested the public records for the house I grew up in, the house Beatrice and Walter were living in. The house they'd told everyone they were struggling to maintain while helping me raise my daughter. "Yes, ma'am, here it is," the clerk said, turning the monitor toward me. "This property is currently held under an LLC. Oakhaven Grove Properties. My LLC. The one I'd set up years ago on the advice of a financial planner, a way to protect the one major asset I'd inherited from my grandmother. They were living in my house. There's no record of any rental income for this property for the last 2 years, the clerk added, peering at the screen. I stared at the screen, letting the reality sink in, a cold wave of clarity washing over me. They were living under my roof, rent-free, while systematically draining my finances and trying to destroy my life. They were using my own kindness, my own assets, as a weapon against me. Back in my car, I sat for a long moment, the quiet hum of the heater filling the small space. I pulled out my phone and called the lawyer whose number I'd saved over a year ago, back when I'd first dreamed of breaking free but lacked the courage. His voice was calm and steady as he listened to my story. He explained the process of filing for a restraining order and a formal eviction. "You have every legal right to do this, Lyra," he said, his voice kind but firm. "And from what you've told me, you have more than enough cause. You're not alone in this." When I returned home, the afternoon light was already fading. I picked up Nina from school, and we drove home in a comfortable silence, the radio playing softly in the background. At a stoplight, she reached over and took my hand, her small fingers wrapping around mine. I squeezed back, a silent communication passing between us. I was here. I would not fail her again. That evening, while I was cleaning up after dinner, Nina sat at the table with her crayons, drawing quietly. After a few minutes, she held up her paper. It was a picture of a small house with a purple door, 2 stick figures holding hands under a smiling yellow sun. "This is us, Mom," she said, her voice small but clear. "We're safe here." A single tear slipped down my cheek as I took the drawing from her, pressing it to my chest. She needed me to fight. She needed me to protect the little world we had left. That night, after Nina was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table, the legal paperwork spread out before me. I signed the forms for the restraining order. I filled out the eviction notice. I backed up every file again, double-checking every detail, ensuring that nothing could be lost or erased. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, looking into my own eyes. The dark circles were still there, a testament to every sleepless night, every moment I had let fear silence me. But for the first time, I saw something else there, too. A flicker of fire. A glint of steel. "It's my turn now," I whispered to my reflection. I didn't sleep the night before, but I wasn't tired. I was incandescent. Every time Beatrice's manipulative screams echoed in my mind, every time I felt the phantom sting of Walter's hand on my cheek, every threat they thought would keep me small and silent, it all sharpened into a single, crystalline thought. It's my turn now. I got Nina ready for school in a focused silence that morning. As I helped her zip up her coat, she clutched Barnaby to her chest, her eyes searching mine for something I could finally give her: certainty. I kissed her forehead, told her I loved her more than all the stars in the Oakhaven sky, and watched her walk through the school doors, her small backpack bouncing with a new lightness. Driving to the courthouse, the sky was a cold, brilliant blue, the winter sun hitting the frost on the grass like a sign that the world, while still harsh, could also be clean and clear. I parked and walked inside with my folder, each step even and steady, each breath reminding me that I was alive, that I was free, and that I was making my own choices. I signed the final papers for the restraining order, handed them to the clerk, and felt the very air shift inside me. It was a quiet, almost anticlimactic act, but it felt like stepping over an invisible line I had been trapped behind for my entire life. Back in the car, I pulled out my phone and called the sheriff's deputy assigned to civil matters. We arranged to meet at the house. I drove there with my palms warm and dry on the steering wheel. No shaking this time. They were sitting on the porch when I arrived, a tableau of bitter resentment. Beatrice was in her oversized coat, hair pinned up too tightly, looking agitated. Walter sat beside her, exuding a simmering hostility, looking like he was waiting for a fight. The deputy's cruiser pulled in quietly behind my car. He stepped out with a calm, unimpeachable authority. And for the first time, facing them, I didn't feel alone. I walked up the cracked concrete path, the legal papers in my hand, my voice even and clear when I spoke. "You've been served." I placed the eviction notice into Walter's hand. His fingers closed around it slowly, his eyes narrowing into slits. Beatrice shot to her feet so quickly her plastic lawn chair rattled. Her voice sliced through the cold air. "You're throwing us out? Your own parents? After everything we've done for you? What kind of daughter does that?" I took a breath, feeling the solid ground beneath my feet. "A daughter who is done being your ATM," I said. "And a mother who is protecting her child." Neighbors began to appear, drawn out by the shouting. Curious faces peeked from behind curtains, and a few stepped onto their lawns. Beatrice's voice rose, shrill and trembling, playing to the audience. "She's leaving us on the street. Ailing and old. She's turning her back on her own family." Walter stepped forward, his shadow falling over me, his breath visible in the cold air. "You think you've won, Lyra? You're nothing without us. You'll come crawling back." I met his stare. I felt the heat of the rage I used to swallow, the rage that used to eat me alive, but this time, it didn't control me. It fueled me. "No, Walter," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I won't." Beatrice started to cry, real tears this time. But they weren't tears of grief for a lost daughter. They were tears of fury for the control that was slipping from their hands. She shouted, her voice thick with venom, "You're a disgrace. A Judas." Just then, my car door opened. Nina stood there, holding Barnaby, her eyes wide but calm, watching me. I knelt down on the cold concrete, never taking my eyes off her. "It's okay, baby. We're okay." Walter scoffed, crumpling the eviction notice in his fist. "You're making a mistake you can't take back." I stood, turning to face him fully. "No. This is the one thing I will never regret." Beatrice made a move to grab my arm, a desperate, last-ditch effort, but the deputy stepped forward calmly. "Ma'am," he said, his voice neutral but unyielding, "I'm going to have to ask you to step back. You have 30 days to vacate the property, or you will be forcibly removed." Her hand dropped, shaking. As I walked back to my car, Beatrice's voice rang out, desperate and ugly. "You'll regret this. You hear me, Lyra? You'll regret this." I paused at the car door, looking back at her one last time. I saw her then for what she truly was, a frightened, deeply unhappy woman who had used fear to hide her own inadequacies. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the cold morning like a blade. "No," I said softly. "You will." I helped Nina into the car, buckling her in as she looked at me, studying my face. She didn't look scared. She looked proud. And for the first time in more years than I could count, I let myself feel proud, too. We drove away slowly, leaving them behind on that porch, their angry shouts growing smaller and smaller until they were swallowed by the hum of the engine. My phone began to buzz incessantly with notifications, messages from extended family, church acquaintances, some siding with Beatrice's frantic, twisted version of events, others cautiously asking what had really happened. I didn't rush to defend myself. Instead, I drove to a nearby park. I let Nina run across the damp grass with Barnaby, her laughter, pure and free, rising into the clear air. Sitting on a cold park bench, I scrolled through the messages. Calmly, I attached copies of the evidence when it felt right, stating the simple, unadorned facts without anger, without pleading to be understood. Let them believe what they wanted. The truth was on my side now, and I was done hiding it to protect the feelings of those who had never once considered mine. When we returned to our little duplex, it felt warmer, brighter than it ever had before. Nina curled up on the couch, Barnaby nestled beside her, and fell asleep to the sound of her favorite cartoons. I sat nearby, the legal paperwork neatly filed away, the lawyer on standby for the next steps. I looked at the window, at the weak winter light streaming through, catching on the small drawing Nina had made of us, which I'd taped to the glass. Two figures, holding hands under a smiling sun. For the first time in a long, long time, I believed in that sun. I didn't sleep the night before eviction day, but it wasn't fear that kept me awake. It was a quiet, humming certainty that the next morning, a chapter of my life would close for good. Nina was quiet as we drove, the car's heater humming softly against the cold that was creeping in from the solid gray sky. She held Barnaby close to her chest, tracing the worn seam of its ear with her finger. "We're really doing it, huh, Mom?" she whispered. I reached over and brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "Yes, baby," I said. "We are." We pulled up in front of the house that morning, the place I used to think of as home. The lawn was a disaster, littered with overflowing garbage bags, a broken lamp, and a cracked patio swing tilting sadly to one side. The wind rustled the dead leaves on the driveway, pushing them against the tires of our car in soft, hissing whispers that felt like the house itself was sighing in relief. Beatrice was on the porch, pacing back and forth, her hair disheveled, yelling into her phone. "She's here now. I can't believe it. She's really going through with it." Walter was near the front steps, pointing at the two movers I'd hired, shouting about which items were theirs, what they deserved to keep. Every so often, he shot me a glare filled with pure loathing, as if daring me to come closer. Nina stayed in the car, her eyes wide. But when I looked back at her, she gave me a single, determined nod. She understood. This was the moment we had been waiting for, ready or not. I walked up the path, the deputy I'd arranged to have present beside me, a clipboard in his hand, his expression calm and unbothered by Beatrice's screeching. The air was cold enough to sting my cheeks, but my hands didn't shake. Beatrice spotted me and pointed, her voice cracking. "You're abandoning your family. You'll regret this when we're gone." I kept my eyes on her, my voice steady. "The only thing I regret is letting you stay this long." Walter moved closer, close enough that I could smell the stale coffee on his breath, his hand twitching at his side as if fighting the urge to grab my arm. I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. "Try it," I said quietly, my voice low and dangerous. "And you'll see how fast the police arrive." He froze, his eyes narrowing, but he took a step back. And that was the moment I saw it, the final, sputtering end of his power over me. Beatrice's face twisted, tears spilling down her cheeks as she shouted to the neighbors who were gathering at the edges of their driveways. "She's throwing us out into the street. Her own mother and father. After all we've done for her." The deputy cleared his throat, a sound that cut through her performance. He handed the final confirmation paperwork to me. "Ma'am," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "the property is officially back under your control." Beatrice screamed, a raw, animal sound that split the cold air. She clutched her chest, a last-ditch attempt to force sympathy from the silent, watching crowd. But no one moved. No one rushed to comfort her. Her act had finally worn thin. Nina stepped out of the car then, Barnaby in hand, her small boots crunching on the gravel. She stopped beside me, looking directly at Beatrice and Walter. Her voice was soft, but it carried across the yard, cutting through the chaos with the simple, devastating power of truth. "You shouldn't have hurt my mom." For a second, everything was silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. Beatrice opened her mouth, ready to argue, to lie, to plead, but no sound came out. Her hands dropped to her sides, defeated. For the first time, I saw her as she was, not the formidable matriarch I had spent a lifetime trying to please, but a woman who had built her entire identity on fear and guilt, and had just lost her only subjects. Walter's shoulders slumped. The fight drained out of him as he realized there was nothing left to threaten me with. The movers carried out the last of their boxes, placing them on the patchy, dying lawn. Beatrice and Walter stood beside their pile of things, clutching what they could, looking smaller and more pathetic than I had ever seen them. I turned to Nina, kneeling to her level, brushing her cheek with my thumb. "We're free," I told her. She blinked, tears welling in her eyes, but she smiled through them. "Barnaby's not scared anymore, Mommy." I swallowed hard against the lump in my throat, pressing my forehead against hers. "Neither am I." As we walked back to the car, Beatrice's voice cracked behind us, one last, desperate attempt to hold on to the control that was slipping through her fingers like sand. "You'll regret this. You'll regret turning your back on your family." I paused, turning to look at her one last time, the cold wind lifting strands of hair around my face. My voice was calm, final. "No," I said. "You will." Nina slipped her hand into mine, her small fingers warm and steady. And together we turned away, walking toward the car, leaving behind the scattered pieces of a life I no longer needed to hold. After I whispered that Barnaby wasn't scared anymore, I turned the key in the ignition. The heater hummed to life as we pulled away from the house that had once been my childhood home. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. We drove in silence for a while, the cold air outside sharpening the newness of what we'd just done, of who we were becoming. A few weeks later, we moved into a small rental house a few streets away. It wasn't fancy, but the moment we walked in, the soft creak of the old hardwood floors and the way the light streamed through the clean, wide windows felt like a promise. Out front, 2 large lavender bushes lined the walkway, their sweet, calming scent filling the air even when the breeze was cold. That morning, the early spring sunshine fell in warm patches across the living room floor, catching the edges of Nina's hair as she sat in the middle of a colorful sea of crayons. She was humming quietly, a tuneless, happy sound, Barnaby tucked securely under her arm as she colored with careful, focused strokes. I sat in a comfortable, thrifted armchair near the window, a cup of coffee warming my hands. The lavender bushes swayed outside, the breeze making them dance, and I thought about how many mornings I had spent dragging myself out of bed, my first conscious thought a knot of anxiety, my first act of the day to swallow down fear like a bitter pill. I realized, sitting there watching Nina, that I hadn't done that once since we'd moved in. The quiet in our new home wasn't heavy with unspoken threats, it was light and full of peace. Nina finished her drawing and patted over to me, holding it up with a shy smile. "Look, Mommy." It was a picture of our new house. 2 stick figures were holding hands beneath a big, round, smiling sun. In the corner was Barnaby, with a small red heart drawn above its head. "Barnaby's happy now, Mommy," Nina said, her voice clear and bright. I felt the familiar sting of tears, but this time they were tears of gratitude. "Me too, baby," I whispered, pulling her into my lap. She giggled as I pressed a kiss to her forehead. Later, I checked my phone and saw a few messages from old neighbors, some saying they were proud of me, others quietly offering help if we ever needed anything. A few distant relatives had reached out, too, saying they had finally heard the full story, that they understood now how Beatrice and Walter had twisted everything for so long. Some still didn't understand, and that was okay. I wasn't living for their approval anymore. I had heard through a cousin that Beatrice and Walter were now in a cramped, dark apartment above a shuttered nail salon. They were arguing constantly about bills and calling Isadora for help, only to have her ignore their calls. I didn't feel triumph at the news, only a quiet, sad sense of closure. I hadn't needed them to suffer, I had just needed them to be away from us. And now they were. Nina had started a children's painting class at the local community center, coming home with smudges of blue and yellow on her hands, her eyes bright as she told me about her new friends and the giant papier-mâché bird they were making. At night, she slept deeply, her breath steady, her small body curled around Barnaby, no longer jerking awake from nightmares. I began attending therapy, learning how to name the guilt and shame I had carried for so long, and how to set them down, bit by bit. It was slow, difficult work, but each session felt like lifting a heavy stone from my chest. I was learning that love was not the same as obligation, and that the word family did not mean I owed anyone my own peace of mind. One Saturday morning, Nina and I sat on the small front porch, the lavender bushes humming with bees. She was gently brushing Barnaby's ears with a little doll's hairbrush, her eyes focused, while I sipped my tea and felt the warmth of the cup seep into my hands. "Mommy," she said, looking up at me, her face serious. "We're really safe now, right?" I met her gaze, the weight of her questions settling in me not as a burden, but as a confirmation of how far we'd come. I nodded. "Yes, honey, we're safe." She smiled, a slow, radiant smile that reached her eyes, and she returned to her task, humming her little tune under her breath. The sky was a pale, hopeful blue, streaked with soft lavender clouds that reminded me of the bushes lining our walkway, of the peace we were building for ourselves with every new sunrise. I stood up, breathing in the cool morning air, letting the scent of lavender fill me with a calm I hadn't known was possible. Nina looked up, watching me, and I saw her smile widen. "We don't live in fear anymore," I whispered, more to myself than to her. But she heard me, and she nodded, her small face solemn with an understanding that went far beyond her years. As we stepped inside to start our day, closing the door gently behind us, I knew this was our beginning. Not perfect, not without scars, but it was ours. And it was free.